Dear Excellencies, your guests, please switch your mobile phones into silent mode and have a seat. The session will begin right now. Good afternoon and welcome to the opening plenary of the International Transport Forum 2023, Transportation as an Enabler of Sustainable Economies, Peace and Stability in Times of Crisis. Welcome, Your Excellencies, dear delegates, our speakers, and of course a warm welcome to all participants and guests. My name is Geraldine de Bastian and I'm truly honored to be one of the moderators of this opening session. This first plenary of ITF is part of a week of collective reflection and dialogue, and this year's theme, Transportation Enabling Sustainable Economies. ITF proposes a series of roundtables, panel discussions, and dialogues on the current and future challenges, as well as the opportunities for transport and mobility as a key sector for green transition, economic prosperity, and social justice. One of the key questions that we will be debating is how we can keep focus on the long-term sustainability issues whilst addressing the ever more converging crises our societies are currently facing. As the summit has done for the past 15 years, we have brought together ministers, captains of business and industry, leading experts in research and academia and civil society from over 80 countries, well beyond the 64 member countries. And this year, the ITF presidency is being held by the United Kingdom. So it is my pleasure to now hand over the floor to Mark Harper, Secretary of State for Transport from the United Kingdom, who will be sharing the highlights of the UK's presidency with us.
Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, and let me welcome you all to the 2023 International Transport Forum Summit here in Leipzig. Over 30 years, this city has become a symbol of renewal and growth. Post-Cold War and reunification, Leipzig opened itself to the world, replacing old industries, reinventing its economy, and regenerating its urban centres. It meant a city that faced decline and depopulation in the 90s soon became a magnet for investment, skills, and talent from across Germany, and underpinning this progress was a focus on connectivity. From the S-Bahn and intercity rail to its extensive cycle and bus network, we continue to see how transport, and sustainable transport at that, has not just created an economic powerhouse, but one of the most livable cities in the country. Which brings me to this summit. It's been an honour for the UK to hold the presidency of the ITF, and it's come at a time when, like this city, transport is renewing and reinventing itself, ending its reliance on fossil fuels and becoming a catalyst for sustainable economic growth. The stakes couldn't be higher. At current rates, we're on a catastrophic course of global warming where we'll exceed the 1.5 degree Paris target. But if climate change is a race, it's one that we can still win. We can still bring emissions down to sustainable levels. We can still successfully adapt to the changing climate. But in the words of the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, that requires transformation, not tinkering. It requires bold ambition and international partnership to confront what is arguably this century's greatest challenge. And I'm proud of the leadership that the UK continues to show. We were one of the first major global countries to set a 2050 net zero target in law, and recognising that the transport sector is our largest source of emissions, we launched a world-leading transport decarbonisation plan, a pathway to net zero emissions across the entire sector by the middle of the century. Take road emissions. From the largest lorry to the smallest motorcycle, we're phasing out all new non-zero emission vehicles by 2040 at the latest. Our zero emission vehicle mandate kicks in from next year, not only setting targets for vehicle manufacturers, but giving them the regulatory certainty they need to invest in new jobs and new technology. This transition, of course, depends on having the right infrastructure in place, which is why I recently announced nearly £400 million of taxpayers' funding for tens of thousands of new EV charge points across our country. Ultimately, clean travel isn't, for us, about travelling less, but travelling differently. We'll still fly for business and leisure, but on planes powered by sustainable aviation fuels. We'll still commute to work, but on zero-emission buses and better and safer cycling and walking routes, thanks to billions of pounds we're spending on active travel, giving people better choices, not forcing them out of cars, but giving them different and better options. And we'll still visit family and friends, but on high-speed electrified trains that connect our largest UK cities. But there's a limit to what one country can achieve alone. COVID demonstrated how interconnected the world was and the single-mindedness needed by the global community to tackle global problems. That's why the ITF is crucial, bringing the weight of governments, business, and academia to bear on a shared goal. Earlier today, I co-chaired the 7th meeting of the Zero Emission Vehicles Transition Council, where representatives across 3 continents discussed how we accelerate the take-up of zero-emission vehicles. So I urge all of you not to waste the opportunity this summit brings, to share ideas, discuss research, and leverage the expertise on offer so we can ramp up momentum on transport decarbonisation as we head towards the next COP in the UAE. Transport's about more than getting from A to B. It's driven social progress, enabled industrial revolutions, and created better standards of living the whole world over. It's always been a force for good, but it must embrace the change that's so often spurred in our societies. That's why we're here today, to renew and reinvent our transport sectors, to unlock new skilled jobs and green investment, and to enable the sustainable economies all of our countries need. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to engaging with all of you over the next couple of days. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Mark Harper. Next, I would like to invite Volker Wissing, Federal Minister for Digital and Transport here in Germany, to take the stage.
Lieber Generalsekretär, lieber Young
Secretary General Young Takin,
Secretary Harper, liebe
Secretary Harper,
Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
dear colleagues,
Verkehrsminister,
Ministers and Secretaries of Transport, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you warmly here to Leipzig to the ITF Summit 2023. Mobility means freedom. It means participation, independence. Enabling it around the globe is one of our most important tasks at hand, which is why the International Transport Forum is such an important think tank and the ITF Summit a fixed element in the agenda of many ministers, decision makers from all over the world. Here, we can exchange ideas, we can learn from one another, and we can see how other regions and countries in the world manage to offer affordable transport for everybody while making sure that people travel sustainably. Especially in times of war and crisis, it is also very important that we can rely on our international friends and that we support each other. Hence, I am very grateful that we are an ITF member state and bring our call for action to life and once again demonstrate and underline our solidarity with Ukraine. What is decisive for the stability of our global community is, amongst others, that we share values. And this is also true when it comes to sustainability and sustainable transport and mobility. Here we face major challenges, be it the energy crisis, be it climate change, or the fast growth of our cities, the increase of commuting traffic and shipping, the pollution of our air, our environment. Here, it is up to all of us in governments, in countries. We need a common understanding of what we want our world of tomorrow to be like and what we can do together to maintain it, preserve it, and at the same time it's our task to enable prosperity and freedom, because we also have a responsibility for the following generations, all of us, but we are also responsible for those who live and work here today. And we are responsible for our societies that we keep together. We have to make sure that people still can move around in an affordable, good and safe way, that they can visit families and friends, that they can go to work, go shopping, go on holidays. So it is clear that we must not overwhelm them, but instead we have to take them on board with us along the path to a new, more sustainable world. And in doing so, we have to be ambitious. For transport, that means that we have to provide offers that people like using, offers that make life easier for them instead of harder. Only then will we be able to comply with our climate goals and get people to join us on this path permanently. In Germany, we have managed to embark on this path. Some of my colleagues have already asked me about this. For those of you who have not heard about it, I would like to explain it. The German-wide ticket last year, we offered a very affordable fare ticket for public transport. It was a kind of a flat rate for public transport all over Germany. And this ticket was so successful that now we have launched it on a permanent basis. As of this month, everybody can travel for 49 euros a month all over Germany using trains and buses. That's a revolution of our very difficult and complex fare system. And now you can simply climb on board and off you go all over the country. And the sales figures actually only demonstrate that. 7 million people have already a subscription for this ticket, amongst them 2 million new customers who never had a public transport ticket subscription. So if it is attractive for people, we can achieve a lot in only a brief period of time, and I believe that in that way we can achieve a lot more than we can using permits. And now public transport in Germany is discussed all over the world. And in having made the decision that it's a digital ticket, we have already brought about a wave of modernization in public transport companies, and we're very, very pleased to see that other nations in Europe have told us that they plan to launch a similar ticket. And when I recently visited the Baltic states, I was even told that we have become a role model. Wouldn't it be great if maybe sometime we could use one and the same ticket in Paris, in Rome, or in Leipzig? Until then, of course, we still have a long way to go, but I'm convinced that it's ideas like these that are attractive for people. Convince them, change something. Ideas that do not limit your movement, that do not ask you to refrain from doing something, but that make life easier and make a new kind of mobility fun to use. And I'm sure that in the next few days in Leipzig, we will hear a lot more about ideas like that. Dear Mark Harper, I would like to thank you for having accepted the presidency on behalf of the UK, and I'm looking forward to this year's ITF summit. Us ministers of transport have a difficult yet very important and wonderful task, because mobility means quality of life, and it's an important part of our personal freedom. Let us work towards the goal together while joining ranks to enable mobility worldwide. And now I wish all of us a successful and inspiring ITF Summit 2023. Thank you very much.
Ganz herzlichen Dank, Herr Wissinger. Now I would like to hand over the floor to Young Tae Kim, Secretary General of the International Transport Forum.
Mr. President, Secretary of State Harper, Federal Minister Wissing, Ministers, Excellencies, and friends. This is among the largest crowd ever at a summit of the International Transport Forum. As of today, over 1,100 delegates, over 50 ministers and vice ministers, and many heads of international organizations have come to Leipzig to spend 3 days together to share, listen, and learn. Your presence is testimony to the relevance of this summit. It is also testimony to the relevance of this organization and the global dialogue for better transport that is its mission. My sincerest gratitude goes to the United Kingdom and Secretary of State Mark Harper personally. The UK presidency has steered this organization most capably through these tough times. Your ability to balance diplomacy with determination has helped to move us forward. Our host country, Germany, has again offered us visitors the warmest of welcomes. Minister Wissing, the ITF thanks you for Germany's hospitality and generosity. Much of what the summit offers is made possible by our sponsors, our regional partners Saxony, the Fédération Internationale de Motocyclisme, the US Grains Council, and Autocrypt. And thank you all so much. A year ago, the joy of meeting in person again after the pandemic was overshadowed by war. That war, that shadow, still hangs over us. And I repeat what I said then. This war does the opposite of what the transport community works for. Destroying bridges, ports, roads, rail lines, and airports goes against all of it. 70 years ago, in 1953, ITF's forerunner was created to rebuild European transport after the World War II. And tomorrow morning, a special ministers' roundtable on Ukraine will convene. It will discuss actions to rebuild the transport infrastructure of our valued member country and to restore Ukraine's international links as integral parts of improved Eurasian transport corridors and supply chains. The present disruptions pose great challenges, yet we must not be blown off, of course. Our destination is set, a world connected by transport systems that enable our economies to function sustainably. Demand for transport will continue to grow. On current trends, passenger activity will be nearly 80% higher in 2050. For freight, demand will be double that in 2019. These are figures from the latest ITF Transport Outlook launched this morning. More and more people have access to mobility and thereby to opportunities Smallholders who carried their produce to market on their backs or bicycle now have a scooter or a van. They can afford to travel to see their capital city or even an overseas destination. But benefits and downsides of mobility are unequally distributed. Fewer than 20% of people have ever taken a flight. More than 90% of road deaths happen in less prosperous countries. Economic and social sustainability deserve all our attention, yet they are nested within a large challenge, that to our natural environment. We simply cannot fail to maintain and sustain our planet. If we fail, wealth and equity will count for nothing. Transport will be part of the solution by quickly ending its oil dependency. But as I said, we must not be blown off course. Yet not all of us need to take the same route. A ship from Asia bound for the Americas can sail westwards across the Atlantic, or it can head eastwards through the Pacific. The captain chooses, so the ship reaches the port in time. It's the same with sustainability. Countries can take different paths to net zero. What counts is that we all get there in time. All the actions in place now, all the commitments already there, they will cut transport CO2 by only 3% over the next 25 years. That is nowhere near a safe destination. An ambitious, accelerated action can still catapult us into a low-carbon reality. The measures outlined in the Transport Outlook can free us from 80% of transport emissions by 2050. On that path, transport reaches the 1.5 degrees target of the Paris Agreement. Investing now in core infrastructure for green, sustainable transport will actually cost about 5% less than the funds needed in any case to accommodate higher demand. And here we return to the case for sustainability broadly defined. Decarbonizing transport also makes cities more livable. It makes roads safer. It makes the air healthier. It makes supply chains more efficient and resilient. It gives more people access to opportunities. A whole list of wider benefits flow from investing in sustainable transport. We know what to do. Now it's time to act. A great leader who weathered global crises in his time, Franklin Roosevelt, summed it up. To reach a port, we must set sail. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Young Tae Kim. Your Excellencies, dear speakers, dear guests, we would now like to take you on a little trip to the country that holds the presidency this year by sharing some visual impressions from the UK with you.
The United Kingdom, leading in enabling sustainable economies through transport. Britain is leading the charge toward net zero by 2050, committing billions to decarbonize transport, including maritime, support the transition to electric vehicles, phase out the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles, and introduce a sustainable aviation fuel mandate. And we're taking the lead on tackling climate change and transporting people safely, investing to prepare for whatever the future may bring. We are leading the development of future transport technologies with grant programs supporting British companies to develop exciting innovations that will revolutionize transport worldwide. And we're leading in delivering decarbonized, active, connected transport networks in and between our cities, creating better connected, happier and healthier communities with sustainable public transport infrastructure at their heart. We are leading in delivering inclusive transport too, improving accessibility, giving transport staff the confidence and skills, and teaching transport users to be considerate of those with disabilities. Join us. Let's use the incredible power of transport to develop solutions to some of our most pressing global problems and create the sustainable economies of the future. The United Kingdom welcomes the world to the International Transport Forum Summit 2023.
So now it is time for the centerpiece, so to speak, of this opening plenary, the discussion on the theme of this session, transport as an enabler of sustainable economies, peace and stability in times of crisis. And to lead this discussion, I would like to leave you in the able hands of my colleague, Axel Threlfall, editor-at-large at Reuters. Please give him a big round of applause. Axel, welcome on stage.
Thank you very much. A very warm welcome, everyone. I'm thrilled to be back here in Leipzig, this impressive event. Look, we've heard plenty about the context over the past 20 minutes, so I'm going to keep this introduction as they set up the tables and chairs very, very brief. This is the panel segment, as Geraldine said, of the opening plenary, a really good opportunity, I think, to throw around some of the big issues in a more conversational format. We've got a super panel lined up for you today from business and the policy side. I'll introduce them in just a moment. I do, though, want to say something very quickly about that title, that big title, Transport as an Enabler of Sustainable Economies, Peace and Stability in Times of Crisis. Yeah, I think it's an important title because it incorporates so much of what is going on in the current context. This is a discussion framed by an increasingly fractured, discordant world, by economic uncertainty, the energy crisis, supply chain disruption, and of course, climate change. It impacts all ministries: economics, energy, environment, trade, foreign policy, and of course, transport. All of the above has a huge impact on transport systems, but transport can, of course, play a vital role too, as we've just heard, in promoting cooperation, peace and stability. That is the premise of the conversation over the next hour. I say premise, maybe a claim, maybe an aspiration. Let's find out. Let me invite the panelists up onto the stage. Mark Harper is Secretary of State for Transport for the United Kingdom. Come on up. Hee Ryong-won, Minister of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, South Korea. Nice to see you again, Minister. Carlos Monge Jr., Undersecretary of Transportation Policy, Department of Transport, the US. Welcome, Minister. Olga Yerofa, Executive Secretary, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Chris Peters, Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Melissa Williams, President, Shell Marine, and last but certainly not least, JJ Yu, Vice Chair at SK Group. Yeah, take a seat. Wonderful. Okay, good. Thank you very much. So, look, a really diverse panel. I want to get stuck in. I want to keep this as conversational and as interactive as I can. And I think the way we're going to start this is give you all an opportunity to do your elevator pitch, if you like, on the title here. And Minister Harper, I want to start with you. And hear from you the ways in which you think transport can contribute to peace and stability, ultimately support prosperity and growth. I talked, was it fair of me to say this is a claim, an aspiration, or to what extent is this already happening?
Well, thank you very much. Look, let me do a couple of things. So on the sustainable economies piece, there's the domestic part of the agenda. You know, we're spending in the UK over the next 2 years, £40 billion on capital investment spread across all transport modes. So investment in rail, in road transport, in active travel, across the piece, both in new infrastructure, but also in renewing and and maintaining our existing infrastructure, which contributes to levelling up across the whole UK. So spending that money in a way that develops the economy domestically. But I think also internationally, we've seen a couple of things. We saw how important transport is through the pandemic when lots of it got shut down for people, but actually lots of transport of goods continued to keep flowing to keep the world economy working. We saw what a massive disruption there was to the world economy through that period. And then post the pandemic, I think we've seen from the public a massive appetite to get back to travelling again. So I think that's something I said in my remarks, and also the Minister Vissing said about we want to make sure people can be mobile, but in a way that is sustainable, rather than, as some argue, that we have less transport and less mobility. This is about having more mobility, but in a sustainable way. Final thing, just on the peace and stability point, I think we've also seen transport ministers coming together dealing with Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. We've looked at how we can support Ukraine in keeping its transport system working, being able to export its grain. There were innovative ways of dealing with that. We in the United Kingdom are doing what we can bilaterally to support Ukraine. And we've also seen the use of transport both economically to keep our economies flowing, but also, frankly, to use transport systems to supply Ukraine with the tools it needs, both weapons and other tools, to defeat Russia. So I think there's a really important role for transport systems here to deal with sustainable economies, but also to deal with getting us back to a more stable and peaceful economic system.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Minister. And I'm glad you talked about Russia-Ukraine, because we had talked about this previously with you, Chris, and you, Olga. I know you've got something to say about this. The peace and stability bit. We are talking about Russia-Ukraine here, right? That's how it comes in. One second, Chris. Minister One, I want to. Sorry, you're going to have an opportunity to talk about this. Minister One, same starter question to you. You know, I note that your main policy initiative is mobility innovation. We talked about that earlier. To ensure your competitiveness. Just give us your pitch, how critical transport is in promoting peace and stability and supporting prosperity and supporting growth in your country.
Yeah. I think that transportation brings people the opportunities for the more active economic activities. Yeah, and these days we are facing the tasks of digitalization and going over to the green economies and sustainable the future models of economy. And then the innovation in transportation means the creating new jobs, and connecting people more closer, and it will bring the new opportunities of embracing and including more people into the productive, and it will level up the productivity. So it will contribute to we keep the new mobilities and technologies and new way of services and new logistics. So it will enhance the capacity of Korea, and we'll make ourselves well prepared for the peace and the tackling all the risks of future. And we could share our technology and experiences, our systems with the other countries in the global southern areas.
And is Korea, I mean, I would ask this of everyone, is Korea having to invest a lot more money to make this connection, the connection in our title, happen more quickly?
Yeah. So the new mobilities and new way of collaboration and the production it needs the backup of the new logistics and the way of the moving. So it needs the technologies and incentives the members, the peoples join the new innovative ways of transportation, way of life.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Minister Monheim, how do you explain to the US public how transport is enabling the US, a sustainable US economy, is enabling growth in the US? Well, actually, not just in the US, but globally. How do you sell that to the public?
I think, well, the way our original climate czar in the Biden administration, Gene McCarthy, used to say, when I want people to think of climate, I wanted them to think of jobs, jobs, jobs. She's got a heavy Boston accent. Jobs, jobs, jobs. And for us, you know, we're at a moment of promise and of peril. Peril because transport sector is the largest source of CO2 emissions in the US. It's about a third of the emissions. And promise because we've got more resources than ever before. President Biden has led. We have $660 billion more over the next 5 years from my department to be able to systematically address these sources of emissions. So we, in January, released a blueprint to decarbonize the transport sector. It was a cross-government effort with energy, with EPA, with HUD. And what it does is exactly what you heard from the keynote speakers earlier today, not forcing decisions on people, but making decisions better and more convenient for folks. So the pillars are making these issues more convenient, so making communities livable, walkable, that we're doing transit-oriented development, we're making biking and rolling if you're in a wheelchair or walking safer. We are doing better land use planning and just in general making it so you don't have to take long trips. The other is, the next pillar is making things more efficient. So giving, again, people the option to take rail, to take transit, and making those more efficient, more accessible, and more reliable. And the final pillar, which is decarbonizing. And so we're going to put 500,000 new chargers on the ground. We've got a bunch of new tax credits for EVs. We're putting thousands of new buses. It really is an exciting time in the U.S.
So just to follow up on that, Minister, the legislation that was signed in the U.S. on infrastructure, on climate, I mean, give us a sense of how efficiently the implementation of this is now. Was it delayed, stalled, stymied in any way by the crisis that's going on now, whether it's the economic crisis, whether it's political fracture, et cetera, et cetera?
You know, Congress moved in a bipartisan way to give us these two pieces of legislation. It's been a year and a half since we've had the bipartisan infrastructure law. It's been a little bit less than a year since we've had the Inflation Reduction Act. And we are moving gangbusters on this. We've launched or expanded 76 new programs. We've actually got a map of the U.S. with dots for every project. There's so many dots on that map that you could take the borders away, you could take the ocean away, you know exactly what you're looking at. It's like literally from the tips of Florida to the shores of Alaska, we are rebuilding the U.S. I think some of the superlatives in this bill, the most money for transit in our history, the most money for rail since the creation of Amtrak, the more money for roads and bridges since the creation of the Eisenhower system. The first time we've had a climate title, the first time we've had money to redo past errors and reconnect communities. There are challenges in implementation, but not from the partisan side. It's kind of the broader issues of increasing costs. We need a lot more workers very soon, and we're working very quickly, again, across the interagency to get those training pipelines going, to get those operating engineers there. These are jobs that are direct impacts into direct ladders into the middle class, and we're trying to make sure that goes well. But it's not automatic, and it takes a lot of work.
Okay, very good. Many thanks. Chris, let me bring you in now, get the EIB's perspective, because of course you invest a lot of money, you know, across the EU in infrastructure and in different projects. Give us a sense of where that money is going, how you see this link in the title that we talk about, and where the gaps are right now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. We are very proud to be here as European Investment Bank. For people that not know very well what for a bank it is, we are a European institution and a non-profit bank, and we are the Bank of the European Union. In 2019, we decided to be the climate bank. And that is very important when you refer to the title of this forum. Now, saying this, each year we invest 11 billion euros in, and when I say investing, that is financing projects in transport. And all over Europe, but also outside of Europe. Now, you mentioned Ukraine. There we have invested, when the war was starting in February, 1.7 billion euros to make it possible that transport and mobility is also in Ukraine in very, very difficult situations, that the people can go to work, can take the train and so on. And we invested until now 1.7 billion euros, and we shall do that also the next years.
So that's not a one-off?
No, no.
That you're going to keep doing?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
We have now a discussion for 1 billion more. Now, also very important is to underline that when you look to the European Union and you look to the title of this forum, two very important principles of the European Union are free movement of persons and free movement of goods. And that is one of the main goals for the European Union, and that is because we believe that when you invest in transport, when you invest in movement of people and goods, then the people will be happier, the people and also the companies can be more active and so on. Dus that is for us so important to invest in Europe, of course, but also outside of Europe. Now, when I say we are the climate bank, that means that now we cannot invest in everything that is not Paris aligned or is not in line with the Green Deal, because Europe have a very clear goal about zero emission in 2050. And of course, when you look to transport, and that is of course a paradox, transport is so important, but the emissions are increasing. 37% is coming from transport. And that is the reason why we are very eager to say, okay, we invest in transport, in roads, rail, you name it, we do it. And I'm very pleased that ministers are also putting money on the table, but I'm afraid that that money that you have from the budget is not enough to do the things that you must do. Now we have, and if I may, 2 minutes.
Make it, you got another minute.
Sustainable development. We have said, okay, we are the climate bank of Europe, also outside Europe. That means safe and security. Road safety is a first priority. Secondly, accessibility. Of course, every person must be in a position to make use of the mobility. Green and resilient, and last but not least, also very important, efficient and smart.
Okay.
And that do we inside and also outside of Europe.
Good. Chris, thank you very much. And I'll give you guys the right to reply, by the way, on that investment bit, because I think it's important. I mean, you've addressed it. In fact, give us something very quickly on the investment bit that we just heard, and then Olga, I'm going to come to you.
I agree. What we say is that this is a once-in-a-generation opportunity, maybe once-in-a-century opportunity for the United States, but we need to do the work in a way that it is a foundation to build on. We are only now 3 years away from our next surface reauthorization bill, and we want this to be to demonstrate through the value of the projects that we put on the ground, that making people's lives better, and by the way, saving the planet and making things more equitable along the way.
He's saying the governments aren't investing enough.
I think that's true, and I think there's more that we should be doing. This is the most money we've had. We're still saying no to a lot of people who are bringing really good projects to us.
And also the private sector, of course.
And the private sector, which we'll come on to. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just pick that up? So I agree that we've got to invest more, but government can't do everything. No. And so one of the things we've tried to do in terms of how we've set out our various mandates on zero-emission vehicles and on sustainable aviation fuel is to set a very clear direction of travel on policy so that the private sector then aligns its investment accordingly. And we've had that, if I just take on zero-emission vehicles, very clear feedback from the automotive sector that we've now given them a very clear steer. We're just doing the final consultation, then we'll put it into law. That means you then align all of that investment, and it's happening everywhere. I was in the US last week. Ford said exactly the same. They are absolutely all in, were their words, into delivering zero-emission vehicles, and that's a huge amount of capital. So it requires...
Okay.
organisations like the European Investment Bank, it requires government and it requires private investment all aligned, pointing in the same direction, and that's how we're going to get there.
All right, well, let's hear from, and Olga, I promise you I'll come to you. I just want to hear quickly from the private sector participants. Melissa, let's start with you. Shell Marine, what's the message you're getting from government in terms of where they want you to go, how quickly they want you to do it, how much money they're prepared to put on the table, what their expectations are of the private sector?
That's an interesting question because shipping is a global industry. And so to get messages from Europe, thank you for moving, in Europe and parts of the US, like California, et cetera, we need global policy for shipping. Because when you think about how important shipping is to the global economy, if you think about COVID and how resilient shipping was during that time, it connects not only the shipping sector, but at the ports, it connects the on-road to the rail, et cetera. But yet our targets and our goals are not aligned with that of those industries. So I think the first support we would need is a global regulation in shipping because it needs to be balanced. I think the second thing that we need is we are finding collaboration is definitely, we must have collaboration because it's not just the private sector or the government or it's the operators, it's the ports. It's our customers' customers to make sure that when that ship is built, they have a customer and they're not disadvantaged. To do that, we need the entire ecosystem to help with that. So not just clear policies, but what are we incenting from banks? Are we still financing traditional fuel vessels? So how do we either put a carbon tax or incent those who are changing the behavior towards decarbonization? It's not just one piece of that ecosystem.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you bring all of that stuff up. But Melissa, let me ask you, you're put on a panel, and I ask you how transport contributes to more sustainable economies. You know, I note that shipping, of course, isn't regulated by, under the UN FCCC framework. Does your industry feel left behind in some ways?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for asking that question.
No. I knew what you were going to say. How much harder does government need to work and focus on your industry? And I know there is a focus because this is so critical, but what more do you want to see?
So those governments, I would assume, participate in IMO. And as participating in IMO, there's a meeting that's coming up soon. I would hope these governments vote towards aligning our target to net zero by 2050 with some interim steps to drive that change in that behavior, because my concern is that we're waiting for perfect when there are options today, like energy efficiency technology. We talked about digitalisation. That is the least expensive option to start doing today. So in those local governments, energy efficiency technologies, at the ports, electrification. The IRA helps a lot to give that demand signal to private sectors that we can invest and have that return.
Yeah. Of course, I've gone off track here. Yeah, I knew I was going to do that, but I like this organic nature of the conversation. But JJ, let me bring you in here with the overarching question, because of course, transport supports your business, but in many ways, your business is transport, the battery manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. Just give us a sense of how you see the two bits in this title: transport, contributing, promoting, enabling peace, prosperity, sustainability, economic growth, etc.
It's a big topic.
It's a big topic.
Yeah. First, I feel very honored to be here, and I thank ITF for this opportunity to be part of this panel with global leaders. Many of you may not be familiar with SK, so let me briefly explain who we are and why we are here today. And SK is the second largest conglomerate in Korea. And we have a wide range of businesses, from old energy of oil and gas and to cleaner energy of renewables and hydrogen, and also semiconductors and life sciences, just to name a few. And I'm here today because our focus on the developing sustainable business can support new era of transport. SK itself and Korea itself has benefited a lot from this globalization and free flow of goods and services. And but we are facing new challenges. And transport is in the midst of the dramatic transformations. And we are very glad, SK is very glad that getting on board in the lifetime chance in US, we already invested $20 billion in new energy transitions, like building batteries. And also we have another plan of $30 billion for the next two waves of these infrastructures buildings. And I invested 15 years ago for shale gas. That was from old hydrocarbon to lesser carbon to shale gas. And at this time, trusting US government long-term goal of zero carbon emissions, we saw more opportunities there. And it's not because we are ideal for zero carbon emissions, but because we have a strong confidence based on each government policy announcement that carbon emission is no longer free. It will be getting more and more costly and expensive, not only economically, but also socially. So we have a strong confidence that at the moment, some part of technology may not at the economy of scale or cost competitiveness, but we have the confidence that at some point of time, that these new technology, cleaner technologies will be competitive and competing other old technologies. And I think it's, as you pointed out, the transportations accounts for 37% of carbon emissions. And in US, for example, SK already announced we don't have revenue goals or profit goals in $50 billion investment, but we have one very clear goal, which is reducing 100 million tons of carbon emission by 2030, which is about 3% of US government goal. And we believe this is challenging issues, but developing more efficient power chips using 40% less electricities. And we have a 3 plant in US building batteries for electric vehicles that can be used for 2 million cars. Such activities will sum up with our eventual goals together with the government. And this requires bringing private sector and governments together to work together to solve these bigger issues of from supply chain to climate changes. And I think as a transport itself has been underpinned our global growth for the last 40 years. And I believe transport is not only supports the growth and prosperity, but also in itself is a driver for the economic growth and prosperity.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And Olga, respond to that. It's a very strong statement that we've just heard. There are a few things I'd like you to do in this. Respond to that, but also tell us what the UNECE's role is. But then I want to segue into short-term, long-term planning and how to make transport more resilient, to all external shocks right now. There's a lot there, but the floor is yours.
Thank you, and really excellent discussion, and thank you to be part of that. Coming back to the title of this panel and listening to the contributions of distinguished ministers, that transport, that bringing connectivity, connectivity is for me the word, because while ministers were speaking on domestic situations, we are connecting those countries, connecting people, supporting trade, exchange of the goods, bringing the goods for people's survival or eventually well-being, creating substantive part of GDPs of the countries in our region, attracting investments. So for me, transport again is part of Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, and transport and Agenda 2030 are means to an end that end are people, planet, prosperity, and peace. So it's quite clear for me. Just historically, what our Economic Commission in Geneva is doing from post-Second World War period. Just one of the things, early 1947, was distribution of freight wagons throughout the Europe just to supply the citizens. And then all of you are transport experts, just have a look on the, speaking about the road traffic, Vienna Convention on the road traffic, or looking on the regulation, our regulation of vehicles. This morning I mentioned TIR Convention, this seamless transport routes across the countries that are parties to that convention. So we have 60 of those conventions, and each of them needed to be negotiated. So we brought people to one table, and this transport diplomacy is for me like part of the peace diplomacy. You know? And not only regulation, but speaking also about the policies, I will mention just one of them. It's like we call it PEP, what is Pan-European Program on Transport, Health and Environment. So it's cross-cutting through different ministries, but through the countries. In 2021, it was in Vienna, the countries who are participating in this PEP program adopted so-called Vienna Declaration on PEP. Okay, so, and I don't need to explain that speaking on environment is cutting emissions, health is biking, walking, using public transport, so many, so it's so multifaceted. Speaking on economic prosperity, of course, and what we do at the UNEC, we don't have maritime and we don't have aviation, we have inland transport, so it means road, rivers, and of course railways. All of them need infrastructure. And we have heard EIB about the need of investments into that infrastructure. So we need to invest, we need to maintain, is giving the jobs, you know. So, so it's so important for sustainable development, economic development. Speaking about resilience, yes, we had several shocks in the region. COVID mentioned here, war mentioned here. Of course, those transport routes were interrupted, logistics, supply chains were interrupted, and the result of that is rising prices of the food, rising prices of the energy. So early in the COVID, we established observatories on the border crossings so that we could inform the transporters and people due to the different restrictions in different countries. So many of the things we can do, and please engage with us on multilateral basis.
Okay, Olga, thank you very much. Look, I want to shift the conversation a little bit to you know, this classic debate, short-term planning versus long-term strategic planning and finding the right balance. Carlos Monet, let's start with you. How are you doing on that balance in the US? And actually, something I find quite interesting is how you communicate to the electorate, to the people in the country, what it is you're doing, and why money is going here, not here, and here, not here.
I would answer that in a couple different ways. One is Congress, the last time we had this amount of money in the U.S. was the Recovery Act, which was responding to the housing crisis and the drop in the stock market. And the focus there was shovel ready. How do we get people working, shovels moving, backhoes digging? And this was very different. And Congress was looking for the shovel-worthy projects, right? The Hudson River tunnels and Gateway, this is a big project between New York and New Jersey restoring rail line. It's going to be the biggest civil works project anywhere in the world in history. That takes time, you know, and for us, the challenge is how do we keep the electorate engaged? The good news is we've got a pipeline of projects that are building and tons of ribbon cuttings and plenty of opportunities to fly around the country with big checks. So, but in order to build a more sustainable and clean and equitable system, it does take time, and so it's buying that difference. The second way I would answer that question is that if you know where you're going, a crisis is an opportunity. The Secretary Pete, who is my boss, and I'm a big fan of his, he likes to say, we've had a couple of them, where he quotes the Stoics, you know, the obstacle is the way, right? And two examples of that. One is we had a big rail crash in Ohio, big plume, and it scared a lot of folks. We knew where we wanted to go in terms of railway safety. We're able to send that to the Congress, and the Senate passed legislation. Similarly, on the supply chain work, you know, we had to figure out, as you heard earlier, just things that we'd never thought about: warehousing capacity in the middle of the country, intermodal investments, and now the House committee passed a package of legislation that's going to lift some caps, let us invest in intermodal. We've really, I think, figured out a way to bridge that, but it starts with having a framework and knowing where you're going.
And sorry to interrupt that, Minister Harper. Shovel-ready projects. You know, I like that. I like that phrase. How do you decide which are the shovel-ready projects in the UK, and how do you communicate this when you're collaborating with the private sector? But also, and I know I've been saying this quite a lot today, this idea of, you know, how do you convince the economics guys in government and the trade guys and the other portfolios that this is where the money should be going?
Several things. Right. First of all, you missed the very important people in government who you have to persuade, which is the Treasury.
Of course, that's who I meant, sorry.
That's who you meant. Everyone else is fine. It's they're the difficult ones.
Right.
But look, we have to do what was set out there. You've got to have a package of things. So if I look at what I'm spending my money on, we've got some very long-term things. So we'll be building High Speed 2, which is a multi-decade rail network where you start talking about things that, you know, aren't going to be delivered until the 2030s.
We could do an hour on High Speed 2 right now.
And you've got to persuade people that what you're doing is going to deliver sufficient benefit to not just the transport system, but the economy. Yeah. And we're starting to see some of that. So you have to tell that story. The transformation we're seeing in the West Midlands, around Birmingham, you're starting to see real change, even before we've got the rail network built, that's actually driving that. And I think we can now tell that story more compellingly. And if you talk to business, they absolutely keep saying to me, build that railway line. And I keep telling them to remember to say that, because we haven't won the argument yet, and we have to keep saying it. But then you have to do lots of smaller term things as well. So you need to do lots of local shovel-ready projects, which are going to make a real difference in people's localities. So a couple of weeks ago, we set out our active travel spend, a couple of £100 million rather than billions, but it's about delivering lots of local projects, giving people those better choices for cycling and walking, and you can deliver them quickly.
And do your conversations,
and then you've got a package.
Sorry to interrupt. Do your conversations in government come back to, you know, the title of this session? You know, how do we, you know, how does this promote economic growth? How does this promote prosperity, social mobility, peace, stability? Is it? Are those words used in your conversations now?
Short answer, yes. Certainly the Prime Minister's view is that transport, and it's my view, transport is an economic growth engine. It is part of three of our 5 priorities that he set out are economic, and transport is absolutely one of the ways of delivering that. It's partly the investment you make in the transport infrastructure in itself grows the economy, but it's the connectivity that you put in place which enables the rest of the economy to function. One statistic, or 2 statistics, both same half, 95% of our imports to the UK come of our shipping, and 50% of our exports by value are air freighted. So absolutely critical for a country like the UK that we've got both aviation and maritime working properly, and if we're going to make those work in the future, we've got to decarbonise them. And just to give you some positive news, certainly that IMO meeting in July, a number of countries are working, UK, US and others, and we've had some discussions about that today, to set a zero emission target for 2050 with interim targets in 2030 and 2040 to absolutely set the direction so that the private sector knows where it's focusing its investment. And because it's a global industry, no one country can do it. You've got to do it with global rules, and then everybody knows where they're going.
And Melissa I mean, does that make you feel optimistic? I mean, yes, it is about having a roadmap, if you like, isn't it? It's about having a clear path and clear communication from government as to the role you play in it. Are you getting all of that, or not really?
It's starting, and so I think the message here is first, thank you because that's step one. And as you say, this is a marathon, it is not a sprint. And what do I mean by that? And when I think about the economy, specifically in shipping, short-term versus long-term, my message is let's not let good be the enemy to great. And what do I mean by that? First of all, there are things we can do today that are least expensive, such as energy efficiency technologies. We can invest in that today. It's a low-hanging fruit, as we would call it. LNG, albeit fossil, it is 20% lower than the alternative. When you add that in addition to the energy efficiency technology, that's significant reduction, utilizing what's already here. Meanwhile, those zero carbon options, what we've learned by collaborating with our customers, it takes them 2 years to build a vessel. It can take us 4 to 10 years to build a unit. So it is not a silver bullet. So we're saying it will be a fuel mosaic. Depending on where you are, there may be competitive advantages that are more affordable during the transition.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we do want scale, but it's just going to take some time to get to that scale. But does that mean we do nothing now? And I think the first step is setting those targets. Step 2 is getting those interim targets so we can start behaving and utilizing the things that are available today that we just are not incented to use today.
Are you, I mean, I know you're telling the Transport Secretary, the Deputy Transport Secretary now, are you having these conversations with government?
We have teams, but I think we can do more.
Okay.
And that is why we're here.
Chris, I want to, from the investor, the EU bank, back to the balancing short-term, long-term investment decisions. You know, how are you doing it in this context?
Yeah. First of all, when ministers have not enough budget, we can offer you the money, loan, of course. You must pay back. But for me, when you speak about short-term and long-term, when you put the goal 2030, 55% reduction of emissions, 2050, net zero emissions. This is tomorrow and after tomorrow. There is no difference between short and long term. We must invest now. Now, you ask me as investor, we need projects. And projects, small ones, big ones, we must always be aligned with climate goals. And when it's not aligned, you must not do it. And that is the main message that I hope also today and in this forum can send all over the world. Because there is no time to waste. That was one of the introduction speeches. And I believe that also. And there must be urgency in the room and also out of the room in Europe and also outside Europe. And we as investors are there to invest in climate-aligned projects in transport and so on, all over the world and certainly in certain parts in Europe, but also in Africa and in Asia and so on.
Are you working on the assumption, again, I'm going off track a little bit here, but are you working on the assumption that we're headed into a global recession? And if so, how does that impact the way you invest
we have, of course, the energy crisis and so on, but for us it was a moment of acceleration. We must now, more than ever, invest in infrastructure that is, once again, green and Paris-aligned. And that is also, of course, not for ministers, not easy, because another issue is you must also convince that there is the people are following. Because it's going very, very fast. But I think it's possible, and you must not always think about big projects that was mentioned by the ministers, cycling, pedestrians, and so on. That's also innovation. That's also innovation. And that is, I think, an hydrogen, most sexy project. When you are in a panel, you must speak about hydrogen. Everyone is enthusiastic about that. But we, as bankers, have not enough mature projects in that field. That's another issue. But to answer your question, we believe that every day we must finance projects that are, like I've said, green.
Back to the private sector, JJ. Again, with the you know, do you work on the assumption we're headed into a recession now? We've been expecting this recession for I don't know 6 months now. How does that impact the way you're making your investment decisions, short, long term? Again, back to the premise.
I think in our industry, for example, shale gas and all these things, at least from the start to and finish, commercial start takes 4 or 5 years easily. And of course, depending on the recession time, the condition of financing may change. So we look for right timing. But fundamentally, we have a very long-term visions where we're going to go. So in that regard, in this new energy transition or sustainable business areas, the policymakers and government is very important because this takes time. So we cannot have very accurate short-term predictions. So we just see the long-term goals. There might be some ups and downs, detours, but nevertheless, we'll get there. That confidence is required. That's why the long term, the policymakers need to develop very specific, clear goals. And that is kind of assurance for the private sector to invest. And also in the short term, but all those providing right incentives like IRA and all those incentives is geared toward achieving that long-term goals. But in many cases, in reality, transformation is difficult because already existing players of incumbents have a big stake. And government try to invite new entrant innovators, but there is some discrepancies in realities. So government usually weigh in the right balance. And striking the right balance is very difficult and the political process, I believe. But nevertheless, as a business person, what I believe is eventually the innovators and innovation should be rewarded and the government policy should be trusted. Whatever the policy instills the trust is very important in the long term.
Okay, well, I'll put that to Minister Won. That trust point, that collaboration point when it comes to investment, how is the government's relationship with the private sector? And I know you have an innovation and mobility background, as I mentioned at the top, entrepreneurship, it's clearly very dear to you, but how would you characterize the sort of collaboration that's going on right now between government and the private sector in your country?
Yes, as you mentioned, we have the innovative project businesses, and we embrace all the startups or the small and middle-sized enterprises to make a team. And in collaboration with the public institutions or research centers or universities, then we set a goal and the collaboration system, and we fund or we set deregulation systems. And if the project succeeds, then we enhance the results to the related areas. And these days, we are focusing on the long-term or very, very new future-oriented projects. I'll take one example. We launched the Mobility Innovation Working Group. Yeah, the relevant ministries and the leading companies and startups and the individual, the experts join together. And we have a variety of the grouping, and we have the testing sites or the facilities or the funding. So if we achieve some progress, then we will take the results into the new regulations and new the governmental plans. So mobility and logistics and railway and road constructing, we have the 5-year term plans, in various areas. And the president himself is leading the committees.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Look, I've got to very wary eye on the time here. We've only got about 10, 15 minutes left. I want to get onto this last piece, and I'm going to throw it out there. How innovation in the sector can help, I'm not going to say global south, but all the regions around the world. You know, how it helps everyone. And Melissa, let me start with you. How could solutions look differently for all the different organizations and the different countries here in this room?
So again, we don't have scale. So the solutions probably will look different. So something that may be more affordable in one country may not be affordable in another country. Let's say shoreside electrification. Grids are limited in the US. In other regions, grids may not be limited in that region. So that may be more affordable for their local hovercraft equipment. When you think about deep sea, it has to be something liquid that will provide energy density and utilize maybe existing infrastructure. So that is where we're looking at LNG with a pathway to synthetic LNG or dual fuel, methanol, et cetera. So we really need to consider and work with governments and our partners and our customers on what's affordable. We need to listen. We need to collaborate, and that is where we're going to come up with the answer. And it is not a silver bullet, hence why we're saying it's a fuel mosaic, but it needs to be compatible, and that's where the supplier comes in.
Chris, how do you think we ensure transport innovation reaches all regions, including, I will say it again, the Global South?
First of all, I'm convinced we need innovation. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to reach the goals in 2050 that the European Union have set very clearly. Secondly, the innovation is very broadly. I've already mentioned hydrogen, and the other side of the innovation is promoting pedestrians and cycling. Now, when you look to the world, we need, that is already set, connectivity. That is very, very important, and to invest with the knowledge that we have in the bank, also in other parts of the world. I mentioned Africa, Asia, and so on. And one of the elements that is very important is that there is an evolution of very big cities. Urban transport shall be and is already a very, very important issue in a lot of countries, but certainly also in developing countries. And therefore, we invested also, and I give you an example, we have invested in urban transport in India, we have invested a lot in Egypt, because the urban transport is there of essence, because they need the people to transport, and that must be, once again, also sustainable. But also, to give you another example, if I may, we have invested a lot of money in a road in Laos. Very important road, and this road was also very gender. And a lot of people are saying, can you explain to me that a road can be gender? I can explain that because we have financed it, that women use the roads in Laos by foot. And we have decided that when there is a small city or a small city, yes, used by women, that the roads were bigger than normal. That is also some innovation to make clear that sustainability, gender, and a lot of other issues are essential. And we invest in that kind of projects. And on the other hand, when it is not, and I repeat that once again, when it's not green, then we say, no, we cannot do that because it's not sustainable.
Okay, good. Does anyone else want to say something specifically on this topic? And then I want to get some final statements from you. Yeah, go ahead, Minister, and then JJ will come to you.
Just very briefly, so on the innovation point, that is absolutely critical. And one of the things that we've done and other countries have done is remain technology neutral. We've set goals, but we've let innovation deal with, because there are some sectors like shipping where we don't know all the answers yet about how we're going to get there. I think actually involving investors and private capital is actually one of the ways that we ensure this stuff works everywhere, because it means you it means people focus on the price and people being able to afford the solution rather than over-engineering solutions. And the final thing I would say is that actually my experience, people I've talked to, there's not a shortage of capital available for good projects. And often the barriers for projects are not the capital, it's other things like planning rules, access to the grid and grid capacity, which are issues for government to deal with. Actually, the capital is there if you've got good projects. So part of what we need to do is set the goals, set the policy structures, and then actually private capital will fund good projects. And that's not just true in developed countries, that's true globally.
Okay, very quickly, JJ, on this point. Yeah, and then yeah, let's go.
I think it's more and more, we need a growth, but we need a good growth, not just the growth. And a couple of months ago, I was in Argentina and Uruguay, and I was surprised that Uruguay already reached 98% of the power supply came from the renewables. And it took about more than 15 years, but nevertheless, the developing countries may have an advantage because they're invested capital in infrastructure and ties to the old energy, and investment is not so deep as in advanced countries. So they can move directly straight to the more sustainable transport or sustainable energies. So in that regard, like a wireless mobile phone.
Yeah.
So in some sense, on positive side, the developed countries, private sector and government can help those developing countries shifting ahead on technologies to deal with these issues.
Okay, very quickly,
Very
and then
quickly.
I've got a real quick question for all of you. Go ahead.
President Biden has directed us to get back on the international stage, and we're doing that.
Yeah.
And we've got our technical assistance programs. We've got a great program.
So this world isn't going like
We're
that.
trying to go back, but I think approaching it with humility as well. That we have a lot to learn from the world. Whether it's Buenos Aires putting the first BRT line, bus rapid transit line, on the widest avenue in 5 years, very quickly. The mayor of Dhaka South leapfrogging technology from motorized rickshaws to a zero carbon future. There's a lot to learn from the global south.
I'm glad you said that, actually, because all I hear right now is deglobalization, introversion, the weaponization of the dollar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's good that you say that. Okay, really quick question for each of you. Now, they're going to throw me off the stage in a minute, but so a very quick answer from each of you. And the question is this, and Minister Harper, let's start with you. Does transport have with this title in mind that we talked about today, does transport have a big enough seat at the table to get done what needs to be done? And I think, again, as I said this morning in the ministerial roundtable, it wasn't really on the agenda at COP last year, and it should have been. And we're hoping it's going to be on the agenda in Dubai.
Yeah, well, short answer, yes, I think it is. It was on the agenda at COP when we hosted it. There were all sorts of reasons why it wasn't last year. My understanding, it will be hopefully this year with a specific transport day. Certainly in terms of domestically in the UK, we absolutely are in all those conversations. As I said, we're investing £40 billion over the next 2 years. Our transport budget's very significantly higher than it has been. So I think we are, and the government's position, the Prime Minister's position, is that transport is absolutely critical in growing the economy and contributing to economic growth at home. So I think the answer is yes.
Okay, good. Minister Ron, same question to you. Very quick answer. Do you have a big enough seat at the table? The transport portfolio?
Yeah. In Korea, the share of the emission in the transportation is 14%. Yeah, it's much lower than the 27% in the average, global average, because it is where the power generation or the manufacturing industry emits the large amount of the carbon dioxide. So, excluding transportation, the carbon neutrality loses its way. So, the Korean government is setting the very the challenging goals. Yeah, the carbon neutrality by 2050 and 37% reduction by 2030. So I'm feeling very heavy burden.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you've got that responsibility.
Yeah.
Which is important, right?
So it's my agenda, and in Korea, the presidential agenda.
Okay. Good. Melissa.
I think now that we're adding shipping to the conversation, I think there's been a separation between different parts of the transportation sector. I think we need to look at it more holistically, that all these parts are connected at some point, and I think we're moving in the right direction.
Okay, very good. Olga.
I can address many things, like we see more investments into the fossils the last years, unfortunately. We want to see more private sector because the ESG is just in annual reports, not on their balance sheets. We are working on GDP plus, again, to assess the GDP of the countries with those environmental. So transport definitely has its place on this global discussion, not only in COP. And I want to conclude.
Yep.
You know, if we don't keep this connectivity, this multilateral connectivity, this transport diplomacy, we distort those supply chains. So the watch is clicking really, is less than 5 minutes to midnight. So please cooperate with us. We are providing multilateral convening platform.
Yep.
We need governments, private sector, NGOs, academia, new technologies, everybody, please work together.
Very good. Thank you. Chris?
2 points. The European Commission decided global gateway to have investments in infrastructure all over the world, and that is very important. We have a huge amount of money, and we support that. Secondly, and it was already mentioned, when transport is responsible for 37% of the emissions, then there is a big call to say we must not increase but decrease the emissions when we talk about transport, and that is the reason why these ministers must be around the table, and we shall back them.
Okay, JJ, very quickly.
I think whatever we do, I think we need a more integrated approaches, including whole value chains, participants. If each straw should be strong, otherwise whole basket will fall down.
And Carlos Monet, clearly you've got a big seat at the table. How hard are you going to have to fight to keep it?
I think it's self-evident. And for us in the U.S., Amtrak Joe used to ride the train every day. So he is asking us in extreme detail how we're doing on the Northeast Corridor on these train bridges. So we've got a seat at the table. And I think the key really is delivering these projects, the mix of the backyard projects that people see every day, and these big mega projects that renew people's faith that governments can work for them.
All right. Look, it's been a really rich discussion. We've covered a lot of ground. Thanks for your candor. Thanks for your insights. I'm not going to mention everyone's name. Suffice to say, thank you very much indeed to our fantastic panel here. Thanks very much. I'm going to hand it back to Geraldine. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was great. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks very much. Thanks a lot. Cheers. Thanks.
Thank you so much to all the speakers of the session, but especially thank you, Axel, for this very dynamic discussion.
I think we covered a lot of ground, yeah.
Yeah, it was really great to get all these insights from around the world in one panel discussion. And if I may say so, as a citizen of this planet, I'm also feeling very reassured that everybody's acting with the urgency needed in light of the climate crisis that we're facing. So I very much hope that you enjoyed this panel discussion and our open plenary as much as I did. That brings us to the end of this session. We have a coffee break coming up now, which is going to give you some time to visit our exhibition, for instance. I would like to kindly invite all ministers to gather at the back of the room, at the back entrance. Somebody's already waving their hand there kindly. We'd like to take you on a guided tour of this exhibition. So please gather in the back where the gentleman is raising his hand if you would like to join that now. I very much hope you enjoy the ITF program over the next days. And thank you so much for joining our opening plenary.